Good morning. Today is March 19th, 2025. I'm Mark Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting. Commissioner Gilman, any preliminary comments? Are you ready to approve the consent agenda?
Nothing is on set, and I would approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Plant?
I would approve the consent agenda as well.
As would I. Let's start with proceeding number 24AL-0481E, Black Hills TCA. Mr. Davis.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. Black Hills Colorado Electric filed in November of last year its 2025 transmission cost adjustment for effect on January 1st. However, the Commission prevented the 2025 TCA from taking effect at its December 30th weekly business meeting, instead setting the matter for hearing and suspending the effective date of the TCA tariff sheet to May 1st. The Commission took that action after staff filed a protest. Since then, staff timely filed an intervention as of right on January 31st and is the sole intervener in this proceeding. Among other issues, staff states that it seeks to examine whether the 2025 TCA is reasonable and appropriate in light of the findings and conclusions in the electric rate case for Black Hills in proceeding number 24AL-275E. As you know, final deliberations in that rate case concluded at the March 12th weekly meeting, and the final written decision was issued on Monday. Black Hills is now expected to file modified TCA tariff sheets for effect March 22nd as part of its rate case compliance tariff filing. The new TCA rate will be set at $0 per kWh due to the inclusion of all transmission investments made through the 2023 test year into the test year rate base. As you know, the TCA recovers transmission-related costs that are incremental to the transmission costs already being recovered in base rates. For this 2025 TCA, Black Hills states that it made approximately $31 million of incremental transmission-related investments in 2024, increasing net plant in service by $17.4 million, while the construction work in progress increased by about $14 million. Black Hills explains that the investments were needed to maintain and enhance the reliability of its transmission system. The investments translate into an approximate increase in the company's annual revenue requirement of $4 million. If the 2025 TCA had not been suspended by the Commission last December, the electric rate case compliance tariff filing would have reset the 2025 TCA to recover only the balance of the $4 million for collections through December 31st of this year. But because the 2025 TCA was suspended in this proceeding, no recovery of the $4 million has yet commenced. The drivers of this $4 million revenue requirements that are still to be recovered through the 2025 TCA relate to investments made in both 2023 and 2024. The 2023 costs that remain in play for recovery relate to using the 13-month averaging convention for evaluating transmission plan and service. In fact, I think the largest piece of the $4 million stems from a catch-up from the 13-month averaging, including the $54.7 million of transmission plan investment recorded in 2023. This same plan investment has now been rolled into the company's rate base in the concluding rate case, and the new base rates are also calculated using a 13-month average of the 2023 monthly plant balances. So a catch-up is necessary in the 2025 TCA. The other piece of the $4 million revenue requirement relates to new plan investments made in 2024. The work papers filed with the TCA reveal that $4 million of plan investments was made at the Pueblo West substation, and $9 million of investment was made related to the West Station to Canyon West line rebuild. So now the Commission will decide next steps in this case. Traditionally, we've reached the point where a procedural schedule is proposed and we move on to an evidentiary hearing. However, we're coming to this later than normal due to the nature of staff's protest and its subsequent intervention, namely the issues staff raises concerning this 2025 TCA and the outcomes of the rate case that has just concluded. I can answer questions or turn it over to you for discussion. I can also present a recommendation.
If you could give us a recommendation, I think that'd be great.
Okay. I suggest the commission take actions to allow the 2025 TCA collections to begin recovering Black Hills eligible 2024 transmission costs on or before May 1st, 2025, unless there is good cause to move forward to a hearing. First, the commission should enter an order stating that the issues raised in staff's protest and referenced in its intervention relating to section 40-5-1014 of Colorado statutes, relating to other applicable statutory requirements, or relating to the commission's rules were fully addressed in proceeding number 22AL 483, specifically in decision number C23-593, and that this proceeding should move forward through adjudication only if staff continues to allege that the 2025 TCA revenue requirement is calculated contrary to Black Hills' currently effective TCA tariff sheets in the wake of the concluding base rate case in proceeding number 24AL 0275E. And second, the commission in that order should further direct staff to confer with Black Hills and set April 1st as the deadline, either for staff to withdraw its intervention or for Black Hills and staff to make a joint filing. The joint filing either shall be a procedural schedule to resolve this matter or a notice of a forthcoming amended advice letter that resolves any disputes between Black Hills and staff. If staff withdraws its intervention or an amended advice letter is filed, followed then by the withdrawal of staff's intervention, the commission can follow the procedures adopted recently in other cases where previously disputed tariff filings are updated and put into place. If a proposed procedural schedule is instead filed, the commission can address how best to move forward by a separate future decision.
Commissioner Gilman,
Thanks, Mr. Davis. I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I also agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC order, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 24A-0442E, Mr. DeCenso.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mitchell DeCenso of your Commission Council. Our decision today is whether and when to schedule public comment hearings for Public Services Just Transition Solicitation Proceeding. By decision number C25-0064I, issued January 29th, 2025, the Commission adopted a procedural schedule and scheduled an en banc evidentiary hearing. Given the scope and importance of this proceeding, advisors recommend adding 3 public comment hearings, 2 in person and 1 virtual, to the procedural schedule in this matter. The first in-person hearing would be in Pueblo, Colorado on Thursday, April 17th from 4 to 6 p.m. The second virtual public comment hearing would be held on Monday, April 28th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And finally, the third in-person comment hearing would be held in Hayden, Colorado on Thursday, May 1st from 4 to 6 p.m. Additionally, I will note that the venues for the in-person public comment hearings will be finalized in the written decision. And if you agree with these date and times, we can get this decision issued and provide notice of the hearings to the public.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I also agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC order scheduling a public hearing.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 24A-0547E, Public Service Companies Distribution System Plan. Ms. Dundas, Mr. Mendelson.
Thanks, Chair. If it's okay with you, I'll also take up the next item on the agenda together, which is proceeding number 25A-0061E, the VPP.
That'd be great.
Okay. So as you know, for the DSP on December 16th, 2024, Public Service filed its application for approval of its 2025 to 2029 DSP and Grid Modernization Adjustment Clause. The other proceeding, as I said, that I'll discuss today is 25A0061E, which is the application for approval of an aggregated virtual power plant, which was filed by the company on January 31st, 2025. At the February 26th CWM, the commission established the parties to both proceedings, ordered supplemental direct, and set response time to outstanding motions, as well as sought final comments on consolidation from the parties and requested a filing of a consensus procedural schedule by last week. Today, we have several outstanding motions to address in both proceedings, and I'll start with the VPP Pro Hoc Vice motion. Concurrent with its motion for intervention, Solar United Neighbors, referred to as SUN, filed two motions for Pro Hoc Vice admission for Byrne Astringer, an attorney in good standing in New York, and Grant Snyder, an attorney in good standing in Illinois. Both attorneys list Mark Valentine of Key and Fox as their sponsoring attorneys in Colorado. Can I provide a recommendation on this motion?
Yeah, please.
Council recommends granting both Pro Hoc Vice motions. An attorney who is not licensed to practice law in Colorado must be granted permission to appear Pro Hoc Vice in a commission proceeding. Here, the commission Rule 1201A and Rule 205.4 and 205.3 of Colorado Rules of Civil Procedure have been complied with. And we've also received notice from the Office of Attorney Registration that both attorneys have paid their fees.
Works for me. Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant.
I also agree.
Thank you. So the next motion for presentation is the motion for extraordinary protection that was filed by the company in the VPP application. In this application, in this motion, the company requests extraordinary protection for, quote, proprietary, non-public, commercially and otherwise highly sensitive vendor pricing and cost estimates associated with its VPP application. This would include, but is not limited to, work papers supporting attachment DE2, which is the direct testimony of company witness Deborah Irwin, in which it presents the proposed budget for the first 5 years of the AVPP program. Again, the budget is public, but the underlying work papers, which include the vendor pricing and cost estimates, are what the motion proposes to cover. Public Service requests the commission issue an order limiting access to the commissioners, commissioner advisors and advisory council, ALJs, trial staff and its council, UCA and its council, CEO and its council. Company claims that this information is highly confidential because disclosure could harm the company's competitive position as it relates to negotiating and implementing vendor solutions for the AVPP program, which would potentially raise costs of the program and in turn raise costs raise costs for the company's customers. By decision C250155I, the commission set response time to March 10th, and the commission received responses from WRA, SUN, CWM, and AEU jointly. In its response, WRA does not challenge the designation of the information as highly confidential, but instead requests that the commission deny the company's specific request for relief and instead order the company to extend access to the information to non-government agency interveners, including WRA, that do not operate as vendors in the VPP industry and are not considered competitors of public service. WRA argues that the information related to VPP vendor pricing is highly relevant and cost estimates are highly relevant to the overall budget. So excluding access to that information impacts interveners' due process. WRA argues this information is necessary for it to understand assumptions, calculations, and other information underlying the proposed budgets. In SUN's response, it also opposes the company's VPP MEP and requests an order allowing SUN the ability to access the information marked by Public Service as highly confidential. In the alternative, SUN argues the commission should require Public Service to demonstrate on a case-by-case basis that the information produced in this proceeding is highly confidential. SUN argues that it does not pose the risk of harm that the company seeks to protect against because it does not provide VPP vendor services or represent such vendors. It also argues the company's request is overly broad, vague, and should be required to prove on a case-by-case basis, again, that the information is highly confidential and the commission should not grant such an overly broad MEP that provides too much discretion to the company as to classification. Finally, COSICIA, CCSA, and AEU filed a joint response in which they note their support for SUN's response and further state their concern is the motion is overly restrictive and does not provide access to the authorized representatives from trade associations. They state that although some members of their entities may have commercial interest in the outcome of this proceeding, the commission has recognized in allowing representatives of trade groups to access highly confidential information that there's also a difference between the individual members and trade groups as a whole. So I've summarized the motion and the responses, and I can provide a recommendation or pause here for questions.
If you can give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
I'm concerned with the unanswered questions raised primarily by WRA in response to this motion. I don't believe that the company has carried its burden to justify why WRA or other similar non-competitive interveners should be barred from this information that does appear to be extremely relevant to their ability to present their case. Similarly, as the trade association responses state, they have historically been given access to information as long as its members do not receive direct access. So I recommend ordering public service to file a reply if it chooses before deliberating on whether this MEP affords the appropriate protections, and then that response should be received within 7 days.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I also agree.
as do I.
Thank you. And then I guess in the meantime, that information would be protected, but you'll roll on the motion after receiving a reply. So I have one more to present before turning it over to Mr. Mendelson, and that's the DSP omnibus motion for extraordinary protection and rule variance, which was filed concurrent with the DSP application. Pursuant to 40-2 132.5(5)(d)(3), the company's DSP is required to include, quote, detailed mapping of distribution hosting capacity with appropriate safeguards to protect critical information as determined by the commission. The company asserts that this information is proprietary in nature and highly sensitive, and public disclosure would present security risks to the company and the public at large. It requests an order granting extraordinary protection with access limited to the commission, state agencies, Colorado municipalities and counties, environmental advocates, and authorized representatives of trade associations. For this proceeding, that means the following parties would receive access: staff, UCA, CEO, ACE, Boulder, CEC, Denver, EEBC, IREC, Sweep NRDC, and WRA. Holy Cross, Tesla, Mission Data, and Pivot would not receive access according to the company's filed notice. The company proposes that secure access will be provided through an ESRI ArcGIS online interface if the authorized party has or obtains that platform, or alternatively company facilitated viewing. States that it has a responsibility at both the state and federal level to safeguard information regarding critical infrastructure, and physical and cybersecurity attacks on the company's electric facilities could cause widespread disruption to the grid. By decision C-25-0154I, the commission set response time and received responses timely from Holy Cross, IREC, UCA, COSICIA, and Pivot Energy. In UCA's response, it argues it opposes the MEP because it failed to meet its burden of proof in requesting highly confidential treatment. It argues that the blanket designation will obstruct progress towards advancing the value of hosting capacity analysis to its customers. And UCA reiterates that hosting capacity information must be publicly available because that is in the public interest and is consistent with the commission's rules. UCA states that the commission has identified this proceeding, including the hosting capacity analysis and its underlying data, as important to meeting Colorado's energy goals. Holy Cross argues that it should receive access to the mapping information covered by this MEP because Holy Cross is an retail electric utility, which though not regulated by the commission, is not a, quote, bad actor looking for, quote, high impact locations for physical attacks on public services distribution system. It argues more generally the motion should be denied because the description of highly confidential mapping information is not specific enough and does not include enough detail for the commission to rule on the motion. It does not understand why it was included in the list of excluded parties because it's a longstanding business partner of public service and holds similar strong interest in protecting critical infrastructure for public services system, which is in many places proximate to Holy Cross's system. It asserts NDAs are an appropriate safeguard for this information. In the response by RAEC, it argues that the commission should clearly and narrowly define the hosting capacity data that will receive highly confidential information rather than embrace public services ambiguous and overbroad definition. States the commission could continue to weigh the costs and benefits of making this information public throughout the proceeding, but at this juncture should limit the highly confidential treatment to location-specific data on the company's distribution system. It requests that the commission narrow the scope of protection to cover information that explicitly refers to data regarding specific locations, but that also allows for the important functions of the HCA, such as how the models function, whether it's accurate and useful, to proceed in an open and transparent manner for adjudication. Two more responses, one from COSACIA, CCSA, and AEU, which argue that the defined highly confidential information is also too broad, should be denied because of vagueness and breadth concerns. They suggest that the commission should only extend highly confidential protection to mapping information that's clearly tied to an identified risk. They also argue that the commission should order the company to provide mapping data within the ESRI platform through a web map that would allow the map to be shown through a web browser instead of requiring a license for the program. And then finally, Pivot argues that the company's request to deny access to to private mapping information to companies that are members of trade associations is neither in the public interest nor based on sound legal reasoning. It argues the company provides no clear reasoning as to why DER development companies in particular pose any greater security risk than the other entities in this proceeding. So I'll pause here for questions or discussion or recommendation.
You can give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
Thank you. Did we lose Commissioner Gilman?
Oh, we might have.
I think she's aware of my recommendation, so maybe I'll read it and then we can pause for her before the vote.
That'd be great.
So just before I move to recommendation on the MEP portion of this motion, I'll note that the omnibus motion also includes a request for variance from Commission Rules 3528C and 3537A, both of which involve timing for phase 2 of the DSP. I'd recommend ruling on that portion of the motion until later in the proceeding, consistent with staff and UCA's request. And then regarding the MEP portions, I'd suggest a few things. First, the commission grant highly confidential protection sought by the company, but find that the company did not meet its burden to explain why Tesla, Holy Cross, Mission Data, and Pivot should not have access to this information if the NDA and other processes are followed by those parties within this proceeding. I recommend that the commission order public service to make the highly confidential data available to all parties in this proceeding that comply with proper processes. I'd also recommend clarifying with the caveat proposed by IREC that this MEP should only protect locational data so that the HCA issues can be fully and transparently litigated. For reference, IREC requests that the commission narrow the scope of protection to cover information that explicitly refers to data regarding specific locations on the grid to allow for the most important functions of the HCA to be litigated transparently. And then finally, we'd recommend requiring the company to provide the information in a form that can be accessed through a web platform, as COSA et al. Suggests is possible. If the company believes that COSA is incorrect about this, it should let us know why that's impossible. As COSA has suggested that they've talked to the vendor and that a web map that can be viewed through a web browser instead of with a license is possible. And then just a note that if this designation becomes an issue as the proceeding on goes with the HCA web portal compliance and ensuring that that information is helpful and in compliance with rule and statute, this can be readjusted as the proceeding goes on, this designation.
Commissioner Gilman, I know you dropped off, but I assume you're familiar with Ms. Dundas's recommendation. If that's the case, are you prepared to vote?
Yeah, sorry, I had a very quick computer meltdown here, but back in action. Yes, I'm familiar with the information as well as the recommendation, and I agree with your recommendation, Ms. Dundas.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree as well.
As do I.
Thank you, commissioners. I think Mr. Mendelson's going to discuss the DSP motion for variance now.
Mr. Mendelson.
Thank you. And Ms. Dundas, I think we still need to cover the rule variances from the omnibus motion.
Yeah, I know I did quite a bit of talking, but I did note that, and we can take a vote if you'd be more comfortable with that, Mr. Mendelson. 3528C and 3537A involve timing for phase 2 of the DSP. I recommended delaying ruling on that portion of the motion until later in the proceeding, consistent with staff and UCA's request. So can we take a vote on that?
I think we already voted, but that's fine by me.
I
Commissioner
agree.
Gilman.
I
Commissioner
agree as well.
All right,
Thanks.
Mr. Mendelson.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson for your advisory team. On March 12th, the Commission received the motion for variance regarding requirements of Commission Decision C-25-0154I. Specifically, the company requests relief from having to respond to the supplemental direct questions in paragraphs 65C 2 through 5 and 65D 2 through 5. Those questions are centered on the company's distribution planning models. 65C directs the company to reproduce the 8760 load forecast with 90% participation in managed charging of electric vehicles and flatten loads associated with water and space heating, and then requires the company to identify the individual infrastructure projects that are no longer needed due to the modified assumptions. Paragraph 65D requires the company to reproduce the 8760 load forecast and associated capital spending forecast using a relaxed constraint protocol, shifting the company's 75% load limit to 85% and 95% values. The question directs the company to conduct this exercise both with and without the flattened residential loads determined in the prior question. The company claims it cannot provide the supplemental modeling due to the features and limitations of the LoadSEER application because Public Service only runs a single version of LoadSEER, which it uses to both manage its system on a daily basis and conduct the DSP planning exercise. The LoadSEER model is continuously adjusting and updating the assumptions on a real-time basis to ensure that the model remains as accurate and up-to-date as possible, and therefore earlier iterations are no longer available. The planning process is highly manual, requiring extensive engineering, and in order to satisfy the Commission's supplemental modeling requests, the company estimates it would take a minimum of 5 incremental months to complete the required forecasting updates, rerun the risk analysis, reevaluate all of the distribution capacity projects with the 5-year distribution plan, and develop new projects based on such modeling. The company suggests these facts make it infeasible under any scenario to complete the exercise within the timelines of the case. The company proposes an alternative proposal in which it would manually reanalyze the need for 7 proposed distribution capacity projects over the 10-year forecasting window, and for every 5 years from 2030 to 2045, using revised residential load shapes consistent with the request contained in paragraph 64C, as discussed above. The company claims the 7 proposed projects support a variety of types and uses, including residential, CSGs, and industrial, and spans several planning regions across the company's service territory, including urban, rural, and suburban areas. However, the company notes that the complexity of the system cannot be fully represented by this subset of projects, and the company urges caution in extrapolating the results of this analysis more broadly. The company would also provide a discussion of whether and to what extent the use of the 85% 95% Commission requested load limits rather than 75% would partially influence the timing and need for the 7 projects using both the company's load curves and the modified residential load curves described above, but would only address N-0 risks, not N-1 risks. The company proposes to provide this analysis by April 30th, 2025. At the technical conference, the Commission requested party responses on the motion for variance by close of business on Monday. No parties responded to the Commission's prompts. So the primary decision before you is whether to grant the company's motion for variance and/or accept or modify the company's proposed alternative plan. I'll pause here for your discussion and can answer any questions or provide a recommendation.
Yeah, so I'll throw out some ideas and then look forward to seeing where you guys are. So based on the company's presentation at the technical conference, I'd be willing to back off most of our supplemental direct requests, as I now understand that the company seems to have used the 75% constraint on total line ratings for many years across multiple jurisdictions. I'd still like to know, however, if the company is aware of other utilities that rely on this 75% constraint. I also now better understand the limitations of load seer and the company's approach to distribution planning, where the investment spending plan is developed manually through a time-consuming and seemingly opaque process that looks at most feeder and substations individually. Given my understanding of these issues, I would grant the company's variance request regarding paragraph 65D2 through 6 in our supplemental direct order, requiring the company to do alternative capacity expansion plan scenarios under two different load forecasts, with the line rating constraint relaxed to 85 and then 95% of the total line rating. Retracting this request would eliminate 4 distribution capital expansion plans from what we had previously requested. At the same time, however, I still have concerns with the company's energy sales forecast that assume total residential sales grow roughly 10 times more quickly than they have historically, and a load shape that assumes much of the EV charging and water heater use clump together in a few peak demand hours. Given these concerns, and even if we use an updated version of load seer, I would like to continue to ask the company to comply with the request in 65C 3 to 4 of our prior decision to develop a revised capital expansion plan based on the same general load assumptions required in the lower low JTS scenario. This would have sent residential sales increase.
You guys lose Chair Blank.
I'm just a little relieved it's not me this time, but he's present.
Statute that requires the company to present 2 distribution investment planning
Chairman,
scenarios.
we missed maybe the last 45 seconds.
So I guess can you hear me now? I just ask them to continue the piece where we look at something similar to the lower load forecast in the JTS. And I just say this request is generally supported by the statute, which says, as part of a distribution system plan proceeding, a qualifying retail utility shall present at least 2 future planning scenarios with corresponding investments to show different future states of the distribution system. Arguably, the company only presented equipment replacement scenario, showing us a single future state of the distribution system. I'm not sure that the Cavallo runs with their highly aggregated investment forecasts necessarily comply with this requirement and provide us with the record I'd like to see. The company states, as Mr. Mendelson said, that complying with our request may take many months. Despite this statement, I'm hoping that eliminating 4 out of the 5 requests will allow for a quicker turnaround of the 1 remaining request. I'd also be open to the company's supplemental direct response coming later in the case and having a separate set of procedural deadlines around it if needed. Even if it took months to produce the single supplemental direct response, I suspect we could accommodate this one request procedurally, perhaps putting it on a different track regarding party discovery and responses, which could still occur prior to a September or October hearing date. In sum, I'd support the company's variance request in part and eliminate the scenarios involving the relaxation of the line rating constraint. But I'd like to propose denying the other part of the company's variance request and continue to require the development of a revised investment plan based on updated energy sales and a flattened load shape forecast. Given that the hearing is still, roughly 5 or 6 months away, and that this modified proposal would significantly reduce the supplemental direct request, I'm hoping we don't need to meaningfully delay the case. So I know you're hearing this for the first time, and I'm not sure we have to decide this today, but that's sort of where I'm landing on this. But curious to hear your thoughts, Commissioner Gilman.
Okay, I just some double checking to make sure I followed. In paragraph 65D, we had asked for different relaxation of those applicable ratings or percentage of the applicable ratings. And so I think you're proposing to like basically in replacement of everything that was there. Instead just asking the company more broadly if they can identify other utilities that use the same 75% threshold. Is that fair for that one?
Yes, and I think we've already asked for that, so that should come in March 21st.
Okay.
But not asking them to do the modeling
Okay.
associated with the constraint relaxation.
Okay. But then for the let me see, where's this one from? From paragraph 65C, looking at that flattened residential load shape with regard to EVs, water heating, and space heating. You still want to have that be run to
Correct.
develop
And
that.
also with a lower sales forecast.
Okay. Lower sales forecast and the flattened load, are those, that's one thing, or flattened load and lower forecast?
It'd be combined into one thing.
Okay, so it'd be a little hard to decipher just the impact of the flatter load,
Correct.
essentially, which is a little bit not ideal. So you'd ask them to still do that and then rerun so that would develop new 8760 curves and then rerun the capacity expansion model based upon those curves.
That's the request, and provide some flexibility if it required, if they could file it in May or June, perhaps do it on a different track. I mean, it's a little bit messy, but that would be one way to keep to more or less the current deadlines.
Okay. Yeah, I'm certainly open to the idea. I mean, I think being in the technical conference and reviewing a lot of the technical information so far, it seems very hard to take at a minimum that there is just one possible vision of the future that is all we can all work off of in terms of a run here. And so I certainly want to try, I appreciate your suggestion here. I mean, I want to try and salvage some look at a different scenario. I think, especially given some of the discussion of the technical conference on those individual load curves and the basis or not for where those come from. And I agree, when you look across EVs, water heating, and space heating, all essentially result in just about every load being at its peak in the evening. So I would just add, I think the question, just for clarity on the question, and B, it says to flatten out A is with regard to the EVs, and then B says water heating / beneficial electrification. I think it's important to clarify that includes heat pumps and space heating is beneficial electrification there. So I think it's reasonable to at least propose this and see, what time frame we're hearing for this revised and kind of smaller request, because I'm struggling with not being able to see any additional view on these load shapes for sure. So I would appreciate any way we can salvage getting that view of the system going forward.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I support that approach. I kind of feel similarly. I don't think, I think that going into this DSP, we don't have, we didn't have a lot of the information that we have now in order to give direction to the company, which I think we can develop for the next DSP, which is, just going to be, I guess, November of 26. And so I feel like one of the things I want to look at is sort of what goes into the 75% as opposed to necessarily running the other numbers. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, I think we got a good explanation of why they use 75% and that they've used that for a while. But how that's calculated is what I'm really interested in. But that's something that can come out through the hearing process, and I don't think we need to delay things that purpose. So, but I do agree with the flat and load shapes and some of the more up-to-date information that would give us a little bit more insight into what the needs are and how that impacts the system and the investments that are needed in order to maintain the system. So I would support your proposed approach, but I don't know if we want to delay a final decision until next week or just if we're prepared to vote now.
Commissioner Gilman, are you prepared to vote or do you want more time? I guess we could vote today, invite the company to respond, perhaps with an alternative procedural schedule and just continue the dialogue over the coming days. Where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was gonna kind of ask about or suggest, how do we kind of understand the timeline for this, I think, significantly pared down request? And I guess it doesn't perhaps address part of the underlying issue, which is that the company claims that LoadSeer is just simply in a different state than it was when they ran it the first time. It did sound to me in the technical conference like those were fairly discrete changes that have been made and not, some massive wholesale change in that model. And I think probably as part of this discussion, we would just have to accept that that is what it is, that the modifications that have been made since then have been made, and the new run is to be the new run. Which, I don't think presents a massive difficulty, but probably worth acknowledging since that was one of their base kind of claims within the filing. Probably best to acknowledge that. And I don't see that as a major showstopper, at least not in what was communicated in the technical conference for the actual changes that have been made to it since the initial run.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was wondering why they don't just get 2 licenses to LoadSeer, given that it's a multi-billion-dollar capital spending request. But as you say, I think we just have to agree to live with it. Ms. Dundas, do you have a suggestion, or do you want to jump in?
Yeah, if I could, just to clarify where we're at here with the motion. So the motion was a request to vary the supplemental direct, and then they provide an alternative proposal. So it sounds like you three do not have interest in their alternative proposal to run the 7 identified projects by April 30th. Is that right?
I mean, maybe for the 85 and 95%, but given all the caveats they put on our ability to use it to make a decision, it didn't seem very appealing to me.
Okay, so where we're at now is essentially scaling down the request in paragraph in the supplemental direct paragraphs we can summarize in the decision as to where you guys are at, which is essentially the BE and the EV and the water heater load modifications to the load forecast
And the sales forecast.
and the sales forecast. Yeah, carrying that through the investments. And we are confident that that would probably not take the full 5 months that the company has suggested it would, since it's a smaller request.
Confident, maybe too strong,
Yeah,
cautiously optimistic, and I'd say we're still 5 or 6 months out from hearing. So even if it did take several months, there may be ways of accommodating that in the schedule without materially delaying it. So that's the hope.
Sure. So we haven't actually approved the procedural schedule yet. We could discuss that today, but perhaps it makes sense to give the company like a Monday end of day or Tuesday at noon deadline to either file a notice or an amended motion in light of the guidance here.
Yeah, maybe Monday end of day, so we have or Monday at noon, so we have a chance to process it.
And yeah, okay, so Monday at noon to tell us how long this modified supplemental direct request would take and what, if any, effects that would have on the proposed procedural schedule that will also delay ruling on until we get that response.
Does that work for you, Ms. Dundas?
I think so.
Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, that works for me. And just related to the kind of 7 project suggestion, I mean, it's difficult to tell of what use it would be just based upon this motion. I mean, first of all, we don't really know how these projects were picked or if they're really truly representative of the situation, especially as you vary load. You know, I agree with the chair, the caveats that they placed on it also say we can't use this to assume anything else. So I'm worried that's a very limited utility. And I'm not even sure what the results mean, not knowing why those specific projects were picked. So it would be my preference to go the chairman's route, and hear from the company and see how, if in any way, this affects the schedule.
Yeah, and then maybe 2 more clarifications is maybe we could also, since we'd never received party responses to the motion, party responses maybe do the same Monday at noon so that we can officially rule on this next week. And then implicitly, I think in this discussion is that like for these specific parameters, you are granting a variance from the deadline of March 21st.
Yeah, I think that's right. Commissioner Planet, anything you'd add, or does it sound good to you?
It all sounds good to me. I mean, I think sort of implicit in the request is, you know, an invitation to suggest if there are ways in which this information can be given that would, you know, any suggestions they have of ways to implement this that would not disrupt the procedural schedule. They may have some suggestions around that as well. So,
All right. Does that give you and we may not be done with this, but would this give you enough for an ABC order, Ms. Dundas?
Yeah, so far I think that ABC order is just going to be summarizing your discussion this week and then asking for responses by noon from the parties and specifically the company as to what reasonable time anticipation of this modified request or order of supplemental draft would be and how that would affect the proposed procedural schedule.
And you
I want to
also
check in. Go ahead.
okay. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to check in with Mr. Mendelson. We also have pending in these proceedings that procedural schedule that was filed last week, as well as the issues of consolidation of the VPP and the DSP. That's something we could start the conversation with this week and delay officially ruling until we see the response, or we could just hold off all of that till next week.
Well, I just have one comment on that. I think I'd like to see them consolidated, but maybe separate hearings, or at least procedurally, the record somehow relied on both, but maybe separate hearings. Commissioner Gilman or Commissioner Plant, you have any thoughts on the consolidation? I don't think we'd vote today, but the thoughts on the consolidation.
I mean, I'm certainly leaning in that direction. I'm not probably at first glance a fan of separate hearings. I mean, perhaps there's a subset of the hearing that is dedicated to VPPs and that we understand that's what will be discussed on those certain days, or whatever. There are just some really significant practical considerations here as far as how many hearings are stacking up in the August-September timeframe that I'm not sure you come to a practical date to hold 2 hearings for this. So I think it may be more practical to have 1 hearing, but especially to recognize some of the concerns of the parties, particularly the VPP issues, kind of have a carve out or a subset where you say these are the dates that we're doing VPP issues, to ensure that that's clear. So that might be my suggestion.
Yeah, just that's what I meant by separate. So, Commissioner Plant.
yeah, I agree. I feel like consolidation makes a lot of sense as there's a lot of sort of back and forth impact of the decision around VPP on the DSP and vice versa. But I do agree that, you know, some of the issues that are specific to VPP, you know, really would benefit from a focused discussion. I don't know how we do that, if it's through separate hearings or if it's through certain days that are focused on VPP as opposed to DSP, or I don't think, you want to separate them completely because they are very integrated. So procedurally, I'm not sure exactly what the best way is to do that, but I would support that approach.
All right, Mr. Mendelson, does that give you what you need for an ABC order or for additional guidance from the parties?
I believe it does. Yeah, I think we can get this order out in the next couple of days and have it give the parties an opportunity to respond.
So unfortunately, on that last point of timing, there's one more decision point, which is that there's currently a pre-hearing conference scheduled in the VPP and the DSP for tomorrow morning. Since we're not prepared to set a procedural schedule this week until we're done with that pending motion, it seems, at least to me, that perhaps that hearing's not a good use of everyone's time. But up to you all. I guess
I'd like to vacate that hearing. Does that work for you, Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I think there's information we still need to better understand what a rational procedural schedule would look like. So I would agree to vacating it for tomorrow.
Commissioner Flynn?
I agree.
So that'll actually be two ABC orders, one in the VPP vacating that hearing, and then one in the DSP vacating the hearing and ordering the filing on Monday, as we've discussed. Does that sound right, Mr. Mendelson?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I think that's it for us then.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for taking us through all that. Greatly appreciate it. Proceeding number 25A-0062E, Mr. Davis.
Good morning again, Commissioners. In accordance with the Commission's distribution planning rules, Black Hills Colorado Electric filed its second distribution system plan on January 31st. The company's grid needs assessment at the heart of the DSP identifies 37 projects. 29 are called short-term and the other 8 are called long-term. And 9 of the projects meet the definition of a major distribution grid project. Or in other words, those have costs above $2 million each. Embedded with the DSP filing are numerous requests for waivers from many of the Commission's rules. Black Hills argues that these requirements are either not applicable or would be unduly expensive or impracticable to meet. The company also states that none of the 9 major distribution grid projects is suitable either for a phase 2 process as outlined in the DSP rules or for a non-Wells alternative request for proposals. Nevertheless, Black Hills states in its DSP that it establishes a capital budget for the next 5 years based on the system's future needs, ensuring system reliability and capturing anticipated growth. The company's focus is on the replacement of aging distribution assets while also addressing additional grid needs. Such investments typically include underground cable conductor, poles, reclosers, capacitor banks, and transformers. The 5-year capital budget that's summarized in a table in the DSP itself and supported with some details in a 2-page confidential worksheet, total about $207 million. The grid needs assessment provides confidential narratives, that is a few paragraphs on each, for 6 of the grid needs assessment projects, and a public narrative for the 7th, and the other 22 of the short-term projects are primarily new conductors, and these projects total about $8.2 million. So together, the 29 short-term projects in the grid needs assessment sum to approximately $47 million, or only a fraction of the $207 million of planned spending. Black Hills filed the application with the testimony of 3 witnesses. The plan itself is about 50 pages and includes about 630 pages of attachments when including the portions that are confidential. One notable attachment is Black Hills Wildfire Mitigation Plan. Staff of the Commission and the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate are the only 2 intervening parties in the case. Both seek an evidentiary hearing and state that they want to ensure that this DSP filing complies with statute, applicable Commission rules, and previous Commission guidance. Along those lines, staff seeks to examine whether the DSP satisfies the company's obligations pursuant to the settlement agreement that was reached in its first DSP proceeding. In addition, it seeks to examine whether the DSP rules raise any issues, including whether it gives sufficient consideration to affordability and reliability concerns of disproportionately impacted communities and income qualified ratepayers. Staff also wants to determine whether the company's projected spend of approximately $207 million is reasonable and in the public interest. UCA likewise seeks to explore generally whether the approval of this DSP is in the public interest, and also seeks to examine whether it will maintain system reliability and efficiency and will properly address costs and savings or other consumer benefits. The decision point for the Commission this morning is whether to set Black Hills DSP application for hearing. So I'll turn it over to you for your discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in first. As we discussed in the Black Hills Electric rate case deliberations, I'm concerned that affordability may not be fully considered in the Black Hills capital spending planning process. So if you guys are supportive, I'd pretty reluctantly be willing to serve as hearing commissioner to ensure that affordability is a meaningful component of the distribution system plan and distribution capital spending process. I understand that our roles in this specific filing may not be perfectly set up for this purpose. At the same time, however, given the size of the proposed capital spending, I just don't know how else or what other forum we'll have to address these affordability concerns. So curious to see what you guys think, if you continue to share those concerns and if you're open to something like this. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I appreciate your willingness to take it on, and I agree. I mean, as we look at increasing rates are essentially a conglomeration of all of these different avenues and areas in which money's being spent. So I appreciate your willingness to take a deeper look specifically at the transmission investments to ensure that they're in the public interest, and we're doing all we can to ensure rates remain affordable while maintaining safe, reliable service. So yeah, I'd be supportive of you hearing it as a hearing commission.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I also appreciate you stepping forward with this, and I think that, you know, all of us have sort of struggled with some of the affordability issues, and so I appreciate you volunteering to be the hearing officer and taking a good close look at that, and so we can represent folks being served by the utility well. So appreciate it.
Does that give you what you need for an ABC order, Mr. Davis?
Yes, it will be an ABC order assigning you as the hearing commissioner for this proceeding and referring the matter to you.
Thank you, sir. Proceeding number 25A-0075E, Public Service Company of Colorado's application to join Markets Plus. Ms. Rosati, Mr. Deaver.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Wendy Rosati of your Commission Council. At the Commissioners' weekly meeting on March 12th, the Commission established the parties in this proceeding and set shortened response time to a motion filed on March 11th, 2025 by trial staff of the Commission, the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, the Colorado Energy Office, Western Resource Advocates, Colorado Energy Consumers Group, Advanced Energy United, and Climax Molybdenum Company. The motion requests a waiver of Rule 3753B, Roman numeral 1, which sets out a 150-day deadline for a Commission decision in a day-ahead market application proceeding. Responses to the motion were timely filed on March 17th by Public Service and Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. For the Commissioner's consideration this morning, I will present the motion and responses, and then some procedural decision points. In the motion, the joint movements state that the application presents many complexities that warrant additional time for consideration, including issues around an undefined market footprint and uncertainties with how the new federal administration will impact FERC's oversight of market activities. The joint movements also argue that there is time for standard application timelines, stating that public service has filed this application roughly a year earlier than required under the Commission's rules, and that the market will not begin operations until the second quarter of 2027. In their responses, Public Service and Tri-State argue that the motion fails to demonstrate good cause to grant the requested rule waiver. They state that joint movements arguments contain inaccuracies and misstatements, and that the expedited schedule in Rule 3753 was fully considered through the rulemaking process. They also state that Public Service must obtain approval to join Markets Plus in advance of the August 12th, 2025 execution deadline for the Markets Plus Phase 2 development funding agreement in order to fully participate in the market's development and to enter the market on the timeline proposed in the application. With that, I will now pause for any questions or the Commissioner's discussion on the motion and the responses.
You have a couple of thoughts to share. For me, as the utility responses note, the timing and scope associated with the process for approving an IOU day-ahead market filing were litigated and addressed in proceeding number 22R-02490, the regional market rulemaking. Regarding Markets Plus, there is now a FERC-approved tariff that Colorado by itself would have very limited ability to modify at this stage. Under these circumstances, and it's explained in more detail in the initial hearing commissioner ordering in the rulemaking, the regional market rules were structured to encourage interested parties to participate in the tariff development process to get their concerns addressed up front before the tariff was filed and approved by FERC. As part of this structure, the rules maintained a limited Colorado filing and adjudication process after FERC tariff approval to provide a forum in case the Colorado utilities failed to address core commission and stakeholder concerns as part of the tariff development process. As such, this Colorado filing and process was never intended to provide an after-the-fact forum for parties to put forward an unlimited set of issues that weren't raised as part of the tariff development and FERC approval process. The initial hearing commissioner order also recognized that an overly extensive review after FERC tariff approval, and I'm quoting now, could also create substantial regional risk as the participation of the Colorado utilities in the broader footprint would be uncertain for an extended period of time while the Colorado litigation was resolved. From the Public Service Company response motion, it sounds like this concern is real, as the company only has until August 12, 2025 to sign the Markets Plus Phase 2 funding agreement. The utility filings also suggest that Colorado's ability to shape the governance and other key features of the market will be significantly reduced if this commission doesn't reach a timely decision. In reviewing the filing of the joint movements, they do not appear to identify any issue that they raised in the tariff development process that was ignored by SPP or the company. Rather, the joint movements seem to be asking for more time to generally identify and explore largely unspecified issues. But that was never the purpose of this process. Instead, our rules specify a limited set of criteria for us to consider within an expedited schedule. In sum, given the statutory preference for Colorado utilities to participate in regional markets, given the PUC rulemaking history, given FERC approval of the Markets Plus tariff, given the relatively modest general concerns raised in our prior concedings about day-ahead markets, given that the joint movements don't reference any issues that they raised during the tariff development process that were not addressed, and given the critical mass of Phase 2 Market Plus funding commitments coming from a diverse range of public and investor-owned utilities in the West, I deny the joint movement request and keep to the timing and scope set by the rule. So, Commissioner Gilman, are you all right with that approach, or questions for me or advisors and counsel? Where are you coming?
Yeah, well, first, I appreciate your work on this issue and in leading the rules here, and I agree with your suggestion.
Commissioner Plant?
Appreciate your leadership on the issue as well, and I agree with your recommendation.
Ms. Rosati, does that give you what you need on this one? I guess we have a couple other issues?
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I'll now turn to 3 procedural points. First, for the commissioner's consideration is whether to hear this proceeding en banc. I can provide a recommendation if you'd like, but also happy to just turn it over for a
Now,
discussion.
if you have a recommendation, that'd be great.
Yeah, this is the first application filed with the commission for approval to join a day-ahead market and the first application under the commission's new market participation rules. We believe that keeping the proceeding en banc would be appropriate so that all the commissioners can participate and are there to quickly resolve any issues resulting from this new type of application.
Commissioner Gilman, is that okay with you?
Yes.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
As do I.
Second, oh, thank you. Second, 3 parties have requested an evidentiary hearing pursuant to Rule 1401C. I recommend ordering the company to confer with the parties and file a proposed procedural schedule that includes an evidentiary hearing within 7 days of the issuance of the commission's decision resulting from today's discussion. The decision could include that an evidentiary hearing would ideally take place between May 27th and May 29th, based on the commission's calendar.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
As do I. I don't know that we need more hearings this year, but I think it is what it is, and I think that can be an ABC decision, granting in part and denying in part the motion. So I'm sorry, it's an ABC decision setting the matter for hearing en banc and denying the joint movement motion. So does that give you what you need, Ms. Rosati?
I have one additional small point. If
All
that's
right.
okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
Rule 3753B contemplates the filing of direct testimony by the applicant and then written and initial and responsive comments, unless the commission orders otherwise. For this particular proceeding, I recommend the commission include in its decision that it prefers that the company and parties file answer and rebuttal testimony, and that comments may be filed but will be given appropriate weight in the commission's review.
I'm okay with that. Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I also agree.
Anything else, Ms. Rosati?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Again, that can be an ABC order. Proceeding number 24M-0261G, what I call Commissioner Gilman's M docket. Commissioner Gilman, or do you want Mr. Mendelson to start, Ms. Dundas to start, or do you want to lead us off?
I think I was going to start, but let me see if Mr. Mendelson has a different idea.
That makes sense, Commissioner Gilman, and then I'll present the company's exceptions.
Okay, that's great. So I'll try and just give you a broad overview of the proceeding, what went on, especially I think as we use the hearing commissioner process. This is a good opportunity for me to brief you all on kind of what went on in the proceeding, as well as some of the major outcomes from the recommended decision. So following the initial non-adjudicated gas infrastructure plan submitted by Public Service in 2023, the commission established an M docket in June 2024, which was decision C-240092, to evaluate how the company could address 3 specific issues, which the commission identified as needing some work moving forward in preparation for the 2025 GIP. Those 3 specific areas were around gas forecasting, system mapping, and the cost-benefit analysis and methodology used to evaluate non-pipeline alternatives, or NPAs. And I may refer to cost-benefit analysis as CBA. As the hearing commissioner, I held a series of 4 workshops throughout the summer and fall of 2024 with the company, interested stakeholders, and industry experts in an effort to make progress on those aforementioned issues in advance of the formal adjudication. I also issued 2 separate orders requesting written comments on the availability of data sources, electronic maps, and CBA cost and benefit categories. The company also submitted at my request a proposal of prospective changes to how it treats each of these 3 issues and its expectations for, first of all, the May 2025 GIP filing, as well as longer term changes that they expected to be making to their methodologies and processes around those 3 issues. I held the final workshop in this proceeding in December of 2024 and issued recommended decision R250083 in February of this year. So I wanted to just give you a briefing on each of those 3 issues. So maybe what I'll do is just take you through the first one. I know Mr. Middleton will present the exceptions, so probably best to hold any discussion on the exceptions until the end, but happy to run you through each of those 3 areas as briefly as I can, and happy to answer any clarifying questions about what went on or what some of the findings and directives were in my recommended decision, if that works for you.
Yeah, that works for me. You go with that, Commissioner Plant? Yep.
Okay, so first, gas forecasting, Rule 4553B of the Commission's rules regulating gas utilities sets forth the forecast requirements for a gas utilities GIP or gas infrastructure plan. As a reminder, the utility is required to present reference or baseline low and high forecasts for the design, peak demand, customer count, sales and capacity forecast, gas content, including mixtures by volume of hydrogen and recovered methane expected, and system-wide greenhouse gas emissions consistent with the utility's approved clean heat plan. The utility must also indicate how its forecast incorporates, to the extent possible, relevant external factors that include but aren't limited to the current and enacted state and local building codes, changes in the utility's line extension policy, and the associated impact on gas customer growth, building electrification programs, or incentives offered by local electric utilities or local or federal incentives that might overlap with the utility's gas service territory, as well as the price elasticity of demand for gas usage. In its November 2024 proposal and the December workshop presentation, the company laid out its 2025 GIP forecasting proposal. And I think you've probably seen this, but essentially they provide, they separate between market electrification, which is electrification they anticipate to kind of happen, as I would describe, absent our programs and incentives and things, and then beneficial electrification, which would be likely more tied to company rebates and policies and plans before the commission. So for the market electrification, the company used a home energy survey that they send to customers every 2 years, but it does not generally net the last year or 2 of each survey cycle in information. So I found it to be a bit limited. But long story short, even looking back several years, the company was seeing somewhat of a trend to a higher adoption of electric technologies versus gas technologies and heating systems. So that's what's generally reflected there. In the low forecast, the company assumes beneficial electrification as a result of the clean heat plan, although the amended preferred portfolio, not the actual portfolio approved by the commission, which they cite to be a timing issue with their forecast development. For the base forecast for beneficial electrification, they include just the 2024 to 2026 DSM-VE plan and do not include impacts of the clean heat plan in that baseline forecast. And then for the high forecast, they do not include either of those plans that have been adjudicated before the commission. It notes that the customer counts it uses are now stratified to the county level for design peak demand forecasts. So the electric system planning aligns with assumed electrification adoption rates. With respect to long-term improvements, the company indicated it plans to move beyond customer counts to a forecast that's more based on customer propensity to adopt technology and a more bottom-up forecasting approach, but does not expect this approach will be employed for the 2025 GIP. The company provides some detail of its forecasting process, which is roughly 15 months long. So they indicate that essentially the GIP and docket proceeding what is not really able to have much influence on the forecasting that was already done in preparation for the 2025 GIP. So just some high-level findings and conclusions from the recommended decision specific to forecasting, and then I'm happy to turn it over to you to see if you have any questions in this particular area. First, I found that the company's forecasting proposals do not appear to be compliant with rules 4553 3B and 4731A1 because the company did not provide, because the company didn't provide full notice to the full commission of its inability to meet these requirements. In the recommended decision, I did not adjust the commission's order in the gift decision, which required compliant forecasting on or before the 2025 gift filing. So that is still an open issue. Essentially, the company stated in a workshop that they were not able to or did not expect to have compliant forecasting by the 2025 gift, but they have not filed anything before the entire commission. And since that was a commission order, I declined to really fully address that issue within this proceeding. I think we're generally fairly disappointed that there's a 15-month lag process for forecasting, which really limits the company's ability to react to commission orders and changes, as well as plans and changes that may be developed in that impending period, making there be quite a lag in that forecasting. So it's possible in the future the commission may wish to engage with an outside entity to look more at that forecasting if that could be done on a quicker basis than what the company portrays as their timeline. I also determined that the company's proposal put forth in its November filing does not present a reasonable range of forecasts upon which to base the upcoming gift, because the company's proposed approach ignores or improperly discounts enacted legislation, policy, approved commission plans, and broader market forces that may already be at play. The company's treatment of market versus beneficial electrification was not overwhelmingly clear, but it stands to reason the company should include the most recent trends it's seen through those home energy use studies and other appropriate research to continue to update trends in electrification occurring in the marketplace and incorporate that intelligence ideally in a way that has data that's less than 5 years old, which is essentially the vintage of what we were seeing used in this forecast. The company should include the anticipated savings attributed to both the DSM BE-SI and the Clean Heat Plan related to BE and DSM in its base forecast, rather than only its low forecast. The high forecast as presented was also inappropriately high in this proceeding. The company did not satisfactorily demonstrate how it includes BE and DSM initiatives that are likely to have the most impact on gas usage and capacity needs in its high forecast. The company and its forecasting could likely benefit from enhanced coordination with local municipalities. Those municipalities may have significant relevant information about major gas loads that may be emerging or may be looking to be eliminated in the near future, and better coordination could really enhance the accuracy of these forecasts. And then not really a new issue, but to identify again the emergence of homes that will be primarily heated by electricity, but rely on gas as a backup fuel for the coldest days will present a key challenge in forecasting. The company's model for gas backup characteristics of an air source heat pump appear to be based on very conservative assumptions that do not include any contributions of the heat pump below about 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is a model that they just use to represent the typical case, but I worry that this is not reflective of every or even potentially the majority of situations. So we may be planning very conservatively, especially for these hybrid systems. So that's just a brief overview of what went on in forecasting and some of the determinations there. So curious if you have any questions for me?
I do have one big picture question, but maybe I'll wait till after exceptions to ask it, and just say appreciate your leadership on this and digging into it and trying to improve the process. So I don't know, Commissioner Plant, questions, comments, or are you ready to jump to exceptions?
Yeah, I just a quick question. First of all, thanks again for taking leadership on this. And I think that, the way that you conducted this process in the inclusion of a variety of different, public meetings and getting input from a variety of people, I think was really critical and really helped to inform the process. And so I really appreciate you putting the time and effort into that. And I'm also disappointed that it seems as though the company can't incorporate any of this into their current plan. I was curious about a couple of things. Is the 15-month lag in forecasting I'm assuming that's from ground zero, like starting, at the very beginning, it's going to take 15 months, but does modification of any element of this also require basically starting over again at month zero and taking 15 months, or is there a sort of an incremental modeling, adjustment that they can do that doesn't just reset the clock?
There may be some modifications. Essentially, the first like 4 or 5 months is collection of heating system data from the prior year. So that's like creates their as is situation. Then they pile on top of that. And by the way, we only have monthly meter reads on the gas system. So there is not like some reading that actually tells them, to my best understanding, the peak capacity need on parts of the system. What they're doing is taking monthly meter reads and disaggregating back to try to identify what a peak hour likely looks like. So that creates the as-is condition on portions of the system, which may begin to show, capacity constrictions or whatever it is. And then they layer on top of that the forecast going forward for what will happen in the coming years to then identify what's needed in those coming years. And that's another, I'm just trying to look at the graphic as I go, 6 months or so. So it's about 8 or 9 months, it looks like, the tail end of the process, about 8 or 9 months, where they take the combination of that as is and the forecast that's on top of it, and then act upon that, essentially identifying the areas of capacity constraint, evaluating what the project solution is to that, evaluating NPAs, and then kind of developing their filing.
So they file a GIP every 2 years, right? Every 24 months.
Yeah.
And our process is going to take what, 9 months? So basically right at the end of our process, they're starting their 15 months for the next GIP. There's not really any period in there where we can.
Yeah, I think a key question will be how, like, if this starts if we're getting GIPs in May and litigating them until the beginning of the following year, how do we ensure that outcomes of the prior GIP are able to be utilized in the future forecasting? I think will be a key question in this GIP. Certainly, I wasn't aware of what they're communicating as really a very long lead time to create this and influence this as we went, and we were moving as quick as we could in this proceeding to be sure it could be of the most use and influence for the May GIP. But got the message pretty quickly that ship had sailed quite some time ago, according to their description.
All right, thanks a lot.
Mr. Mendelson, you want to jump into the exceptions?
Oh, that was just forecasting.
Oh, all right.
CBA, sorry. The commission also identified a need to guide and facilitate improvements to the company's gas system mapping prior to preparation of the next GIP. Pursuant to this goal, the docket aimed to comprehend the company's current system mapping capabilities relative to statutory and regulatory requirements, clearly identify guardrails for public information based on safety and security concerns, identify and prioritize the use of system mapping and information that's necessary and who will need to have access to it, and identify information to be shown on maps, the scale, method for providing them, as well as the timeline. The workshops and subsequent company proposal made significant progress on how the company will make maps available as part of the 2025 GIP filing. The company plans to make 2 maps available, project-specific maps and system-wide distribution maps. The company will file PDF versions of the maps available to the general public and make ESRI ArcGIS electric maps available to regular practicing interveners on a confidential basis. They expressed an interest or a possibility of allowing those to be available remotely for those regular interveners or to be viewed at the company's premise, and highly confidential for the system-wide distribution system maps. Stakeholders raised the possibility of requiring the company to submit its hydraulic models. The hydraulic models are kind of the living actionable models that simulate or show the flow on the system, which is the most helpful in identifying capacity constraints in the actual operation of the system. However, the recommended decision agreed with the company that the disclosure of the hydraulic models likely poses a significant security risk because it's more likely to identify the actual operation of the system in most impactful portions. And more importantly, also, I think it's unlikely that the parties that standardly practice before the proceeding have the expertise or technical ability to really analyze the information in those without additional assistance. So regarding mapping, a few of the main findings in the recommended decision. First of all, given this issue and the discussion on hydraulic mapping, I certainly recognize, I think this is a very, very useful tool that it would be helpful to incorporate in some manner in the GIP process to get a better understanding of the system. But given my concern that typical parties, first of all, there is some security risk, but also that they may not have the expertise. I saw a solution to this to be the commission retaining a gas modeling independent evaluator as part of the GIP proceeding. And that independent expert would have expertise in hydraulic modeling. And the main purpose there would be to have them assist in reviewing the system and projects identified by the company with the goals to evaluate at a high level the apparent need or technical alternatives to projects that are identified by the company, to spot capacity constrained areas that may not have otherwise been identified because a precise project had not yet been scoped, and to generally increase the commission's understanding of the projects identified in the next GIP. As you probably both recall, I think one of the main frustrations in the first GIP was seeing just a small subset of the upcoming spending identified, and one of the reasons identified for that was that the projects just simply had not been scoped yet. And so I think this would allow a longer term, broader view to really identify those capacity constrained areas as they're coming and as they can be identified, even if the company has not yet said this is the exact project that's needed to fix that area, to be able to really address it in time. Under the GIP rules, the company is obligated to include information in the GIP about any pipe that may need to be, that's under statute. The company is obligated to include information about in the GIP about any pipe that may need to be upgraded or replaced in the next 10 years. The company does not express confidence that they can readily identify these needs and comply with that requirement. So I think that's something we'll have to look at moving forward, being that that's a statutory requirement. And just as a reminder, the GIP timeline goes out a total of 6 years. And that statutory requirement that was new last year essentially extended the identification of any areas needing upgrade or replacement to 10 years. So I think that is still a work in progress, just as an FYI. So curious if you have any questions on mapping specifically, and then I have one more section, and then we'll go to Mr.
Commissioner Plant, any questions? You're still muted.
Sorry, I was taking notes, so when I held down my space bar, I just made a lot of spaces in my notes. No, I just one quick question. Are you proposing that there needs to be some sort of a statutory fix, or do we reflect, can we reflect the company's response in our rules, or how does that get addressed typically?
I'm honestly not entirely sure, being that, yeah, it's a statutory requirement that came in place after our rules were already written. So this is not like currently reflected in our rules. And you know, I think that's one of the reasons really having that independent expert could be a very good tool to have an extra set of trained eyes to try to identify these projects coming. You know, I appreciate the company's honesty that they may not have a path right now where they can really understand or comply with that. But I feel like that extra set of eyes and identifying those slightly further out capacity constrained areas may be one of our best tools to ensure that we have kind of the best shot and most fulsome view of compliance there to ensure that we're able to see these needs coming in a longer out time frame. And then, you know, I mean, I think the two circumstances would probably be capacity constriction or like safety integrity projects. And so that one's probably more on the company in terms of, you know, how much foresight can they really give us to how they're prioritizing and scheduling safety integrity projects out a longer time frame.
You want to keep going, Commissioner Gilman? Topic 3.
Sure. Last section is the cost benefit analysis. So again, this is the cost benefit that would compare a traditional gas infrastructure investment. In many cases, that's upgrading infrastructure, pipes, compressor stations, whatever it may be, and looking at alternatives to such investment, which may include reductions in demand through DSM or electrification, potentially some use of supplemental supply if that's needed. So the commission identified a need in that initial GIP to develop and refine certain assumptions in the CBA utilized for that NPA analysis. Pursuant to this goal, the docket aimed to develop a consensus approach, but if not possible, recommendations on a cost-benefit framework and format, clearly identify the costs and benefits that are expected to be provided, including any information on appropriate assumptions or data sources, and identify appropriate data sources where possible to narrow the field of items to be litigated in the future GIP proceedings. As part of the 2025 GIP filings, the company plans to include new cost and benefit categories in its primary identified total resource cost test. Just when we thought we couldn't get more, so this is an EMCRC cost effectiveness test. The company also indicated that it intends to present a secondary test, which is an expanded rate impact measure or ERIM test. The company submitted a draft of its CBA NPA handbook for the commission and stakeholders to review during this proceeding as well, which is available within the files of this proceeding. The company has not yet identified its treatment of net salvage costs, which was a directive from the full commission coming out of the initial GIP, which of course are additional costs added to the actual capital cost of a project to pay for future decommissioning of that project that are collected through the life of the collection of rate base for that project. And it didn't include guidance on this subject in the CBA handbook either, but the company stated it's currently undertaking a process to identify how it will address this issue. So key findings and conclusions here. There is a potential for impacts to gas only, electric only, and combined customers to be different. So it certainly would be helpful if any analysis splits apart or shows the impact to these different subsets of customers as we move forward. I expressed low confidence that the commission will find significant value in the ERIM test since infrastructure costs are already socialized among the entire service territory. Customers are by default already paying for the solution to these problems. So we're kind of all in this ship together as it already is. And then given different reasonable perspectives on inclusion or exclusion of different costs and benefits, as well as potentially the inputs to those, the company should endeavor to provide an executable and publicly available CBA tool that would allow a user to update which costs and benefits are included, as well as any specific inputs that could be used. So this would allow the commission itself, as well as interveners, to look at really different flavors or different versions from different perspectives of how that cost benefit analysis would look. Additionally, I indicated that the capital cost for infrastructure projects should reflect the project's addition to the revenue requirement. This was a suggestion by some of our stakeholders who identified, first of all, there's kind of this issue about how net salvage will be calculated or included. And there could be additional, I mean, there are additional costs included in a revenue requirement that are not included when you look solely at the capital cost of the project that I determined should be included. So the proper presentation should be of the revenue requirement. Also, I indicated that the company must include in a CBA the unrealized upstream capacity costs for the gas system, much in the same way that the company already includes the unrealized upstream costs of the electric system for the electrification portion of an NPA. They include the anticipated kind of marginal cost to add different infrastructure upstream on the electric system all the way up to generation for electrification solutions, but the company does not include any gas infrastructure costs outside of the discrete project that they're studying. And I think it's reasonable to assume there are upstream reverberations of adding downstream capacity, and we should ensure that those costs are understood and are part of the CBA. So we were really looking at the entirety of those costs. The recommended decision also offers technical analysis and consideration of specific CBA inputs, including the incentive cost, participant cost, administrative cost, the electric cost for generation, transmission, distribution, capacity, electric commodity costs, ancillary services, winter mitigation. I could go on and on and on. But if you look in the recommended decision in the proposal, there's a list, I think it's 20 some odd, entries into the costs and benefits. And for each of those, I provided some analysis on what my perspective would be on inclusion of those costs and proper data source that we could look to for that. So that's just brief description on the CBA and where we ended up, but happy to answer any clarifying questions for you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just ask my question here. It seems like in the last gas rate case, we learned that the company had increased capital spending by, I don't know, 25 or 30% between 2021 and 2023 in a business with declining sales. Just curious, in your view, do you think the skip process is set up to help us understand and review the company's capital spending, given affordability concerns in a declining sales environment?
Big question. Okay.
I don't know that it has to be yes or no, and I don't know that we're going to resolve it today, but I mean, that's really the core issue I've been struggling with for years, and just how do we get a handle on this? And it sounds like you've taken us much further than we were through the cost benefit analysis, but just curious if you could give us any short guidance about how about your current thinking and how we continue this conversation over time.
Yeah, I think we're in much better shape than we were.
Yeah,
where we only reviewed expenses after they occurred, years after they occurred, in a rate case, and had really no recourse or understanding of, well, was this really the most cost-effective option to even do for those customers? And so we're better than we were. Is it perfect? No, of course it's not perfect. We've still only done this once. So I think we're trying to figure out how to plug, I think, a lot of the holes that were most dissatisfying in the first one, which in part is how these three issues came to be, the three issues that got, special hand-holding and attention and a whole series of workshops. Frankly, I think there's a lot the company hasn't figured out about how to forecast, especially for those hybrid situations, that we have a lot to learn. But I think this process provides much more open lines of communication to really evaluate those forecasts and understand what went into them and what's going on. The issue remains from the first skip that if the company does not identify an upcoming project, it doesn't exist in our world, right? If they don't bring it into the GIP, we never see it. We can't analyze MPAs, nothing. And so that's part of the thought of the independent expert or independent evaluator, to have an expert who is capable to review those hydraulic models, with a company, so that we can get some independent analysis of upcoming issues, which I think probably are not sufficiently addressed in the GIP right now. If the company has not specifically scoped and priced a solution, we're not seeing those big issues that may be bubbling up under the surface and need mitigation later on. So I think there are improvements that continue to be made, but like I can't imagine going back to not seeing prospective views of investments coming and really having an analysis. I think we've put forth a lot of work to make sure that CBA really can accurately reflect the cost benefit. Even in the first skip, which I think we had some work to do on the CBA, we were seeing some projects look promising, that it was cheaper to go with the non-infrastructure solution. So I think that's the result we need to be delivering for customers. We need to be analyzing, is this the right solution? And looking from an economic standpoint, to say, like, let's deliver to customers an energy solution for them that presents the best value. And so I think like the broad apparatus does that. I think there are probably some loopholes. There are probably some dissatisfying portions of it that we'll continue to work on. Believe me, I want to work on it as quickly as I can, but we got a lot of other things going on. So hopefully that answers your question. Much better than we were, not perfect, but this was an effort to get us more perfect quicker than spending a whole nother adjudication to say, we didn't love what you picked for that. It was like, can we go into the next GIP with more reasonable assumptions to really lessen the regulatory burden on everyone? Let's get stakeholders together and have these conversations on what's reasonable before we go into the adjudication, so that we can start at a place that's probably more reasonable and more familiar.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's a way to get a handle on total capital spending, not just subcategories or projects over a certain dollar size, but probably a discussion for another day.
And one other thing to bring up, I think, was the outcomes of the PSCo gas rate case, which I think specifically addressed new business and capacity capital expenditures, and a way those should be analyzed and viewed in the upcoming phase 2 gas rate case. So the GIP's not the only game in town for how we're addressing upcoming capital expenses. And so I just point to that as another way that I think we're pretty effectively addressing it and going to be addressing it in the near future.
Okay. Well, may have to figure something out on safety too, the safety investments, but Commissioner Plant, any comments or thoughts, or are you ready to move to exceptions? All right, Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners, again. So the company's exceptions filed February 25th make 4 requests: that the Commission should authorize the company's existing forecast approach, that the Commission authorize an alternative forecast sensitivity approach, that the Commission bless a forecasting pilot focused on coordinating with a local municipality, and that the Commission hold off on any decision regarding a potential independent evaluator of the forecast process until the GIP. The company suggests that the peak hour gas delivery forecasting process, which applies to capacity expansion projects only, necessarily begins right after the conclusion of the heating season in March and is typically completed in August. After that, the company conducts the non-pipeline assessment as well as project scoping and estimation. Public Service explains that even though this forecasting process began before this M docket opens, it has made forecasting-related improvements since its last GIP in 2023. Specifically, the company offers insight into how its upcoming GIP projects market electrification, which would happen organically without the company's programs, and beneficial electrification, which is directly due to the company's programs, for the base, low, and high forecasts. The company explains that changes to long-standing forecasting methodologies take time to evolve, and contends it is not feasible to fundamentally change their forecasting to determine project needs at this point, with the GIP due to be filed in a few short months. In its exceptions, the company suggests that the Commission should authorize the company to bring forward its existing proposed forecasts, and also authorize a separate sensitivity which ties to the CHP. The company suggests the forecast is only relevant to capacity expansion and that most of its investment is safety related. The company explains that although it will not be able to comply with Rule 4553B in the upcoming GIP, they offer an alternative evaluation they refer to as the CHP final order sensitivity, which would include some elements of Rule 4553B. They suggest this sensitivity will provide a meaningful step forward and will provide the Commission with yet another scenario to consider in the overall context of the 2025 GIP. With respect to their recommended decisions finding that the company seek enhanced coordination with local municipalities, the company proposes to undertake a forecasting pilot with a local municipality in order to evaluate sensitivity impacts. The company acknowledges there would be several procedural paths for this pilot, though these would not be completed by the 2025 GIP filing deadline, and welcomes the Commission's feedback. One suggestion is that upon selection of a municipal partner in this effort, the company would file for a notice in this proceeding along with the pilot parameters and associated timeline. With respect to the gas modeling independent evaluator referenced in the recommended decision, the company requests that this prospect be addressed during the GIP proceeding. The company also offered an alternative to a gas modeling IE in that it could, as part of the 25 GIP proceeding, host a confidential technical conference detailing the modeling underlying proposed capacity expansion projects. I'll pause here for discussion. I can also offer recommendation on it or answer any questions.
Yeah, if you have a recommendation, that'd be great.
Sure. With respect to the company's pleading for the Commission to approve its forecasting approach and support the proposed sensitivity for the upcoming GIP, advisors recommend the Commission offer no direct opinion on the company's approach at this juncture. The forecasting process will be reviewed as part of the broader GIP litigation, and the parties may have some valuable insight to offer. We would suggest the Commission welcome the CHP final order sensitivity, but not conclude it fulfills any forecasting obligations. With respect to the forecasting pilot that coordinates with a local municipality, advisors would similarly recommend the Commission take no position. Public Service is welcome to propose this concept in its forthcoming GIP. And with respect to the prospect of hiring a forecasting IE, we agree with the company that this is something appropriately considered as part of the GIP application and properly noticed with the parties. Regardless of the IE decision, advisors would recommend accepting the company's offer to conduct a confidential technical session to illustrate the inputs, capability, and process around the model.
Commissioner Gellman?
Thanks, Mr. Mendelson. Yeah, I certainly agree on forecasting. We'll see what we get. We'll make determinations from there. We've already expressed kind of the risks and concerns if we don't see compliant forecasting, and I don't think any of that changes, and we'll see what it is and how we react and the party reacts to what's submitted in the proceeding. With regard to the pilot, I also agree on not blessing that approach or providing specific directive. I would certainly encourage the company to think a little broader here. I think if you coordinate with one municipality, you've coordinated with one municipality. They might have very different capabilities, very different records, and very different levels of understanding of what's going to go on in their municipality. So I question the utility of coordinating with only one municipality and kind of assuming that all coordination would look just like that with other municipalities. I think that's a potential issue with that approach. And then I think as soon as we can get this independent evaluator, independent expert role fit into the GIP process, the better for us, for the parties, for the public interest, so we can really have that drive here. I acknowledge we're getting pretty close to the GIP, so especially what we're seeing in other proceedings where we tried to engage independent experts, the timeline may be running thin to get someone on board before the GIP is filed. So I think in this round, I'd be okay going to the technical conference approach, although I would certainly want to open the possibility that the commission may wish to have an outside expert participate in that to help us, identify any questions or things like that. So I think just opening that possibility would be helpful. Much as my concern with the parties in viewing hydraulic modeling themselves, not really knowing exactly what they're looking at or what to ask, that issue does not go away with the technical conference. I think this is a specific skill set. And so to the extent we use a technical conference in this round as a proxy for that review, we may need some help from an expert to kind of better understand what we're looking at just at that technical conference. So that's what I'd offer as just my one modification to that approach.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I support that, and with your modification. And I just had a question. I mean, one of your recommendations was that what they're calling the low that includes CHP would actually be the baseline. And it seems like that's not a difficult thing for them to do for the purposes of their 25. It's just really changing their low projection to be the base projection. Is that something that we would want to have incorporated into the 25? Yep.
Potentially. I see this CHP final order sensitivity not necessarily as the low. There would still be a low as they define it, and that would have a slightly different assumptions on the market and beneficial electrification that takes place. But I think the sensitivity could be valuable, and it's something that the commission could recognize in its decision as the most reasonable forecast. So I guess I'm not sure if it really matters, to make it the low or make it the base.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
Commissioner Gilman.
I'll just tell you, as I looked at this, yes, their low forecast, so the lowest gas forecast, is the only one that includes any outcomes of a clean heat plan, just to be clear. And it includes the amended preferred portfolio, not what the commission determined. What the commission approved and determined had more electrification than the amended preferred portfolio. By my calculation, about 20% or so more, just to give you an idea on scale. So I think, unless I'm wrong, Mr. Mendelson can fix me if I'm wrong, but I think they're suggesting they could do this sensitivity, which I think would fix the clean heat plan to make it be what was maybe actually approved. I don't know that changes the fact that they're still only using it in the low forecast. When we got the filing, if the commission, reviews my recommended decision and the views on this and sees that forecast come in, I think it's possible the commission may see the low forecast and say, that looks like a base. And then, we just don't have a low forecast, which is not ideal, but I think my analysis of the forecasting proposal top to bottom was that it was not ideal. But not only did it not include kind of the more interactive and impactful policies and things, but even just if you look at the low, base, and high, that they were not a reasonable bound of what could be expected. I didn't really find any value in the high forecast, which discounts enacted legislation, commission plans, and policies entirely. So, that's a possibility. I think it would leave us with no low forecast, but I am not sure, as they've described their forecasting process, if there's any possibility to get a low forecast.
Thanks.
I'm good with the recommendation as modified by Commissioner Gilman. Number 2, Mr. Mendelson.
I think it gives us what we need, yes, and we can get an APC decision started.
All right. Anything else on this one, Mr. Mendelson?
No, thank you very much.
I guess just one final comment. I believe we're going to switch to in-person CWMs and public comments the second Wednesday of the month, given Nehru and other commitments. So just wanted to announce that starting in April. Commissioner Gilman, any final thoughts before we adjourn?
No, nothing, thank you.
Commissioner Plant?
Nope, thanks a lot.
With that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.